Hello, and welcome to the Clinical Care Options Infectious Disease Podcast. Today's episode is the first in an ongoing series entitled An HIV Vaccine, An Unfulfilled Promise, which is produced in collaboration with the Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise at IAS, the International AIDS Society. This series features conversations between world-renowned guests in HIV vaccine development, HIV advocacy, and HIV policy to bust myths and address arguments for why an HIV vaccine is still needed and how we can continue working toward this ultimate game changer for durable control of the HIV epidemic. In this episode, Dr. Linda-Gail Bekker, the Chief Operating Officer of the Desmond Tutu HIV Foundation, the past president of IAS, and faculty of health sciences at the University of Cape Town, discusses the continued need for an HIV vaccine with Ms. Maureen Luba, who is the African Regional Advocacy Advisor for the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. For more information about Dr. Bekker and Ms. Luba, and for links to additional podcasts in this series, as well as HIV Unmuted, the IAS podcast series reflecting on the last 40 years of HIV research and advocacy, please visit the links in the show notes. Linda-Gail and Maureen, thank you for joining the conversation today on why we still need an HIV vaccine. So, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in the U.S., was recently asked to reflect on the last 40 years on HIV research in the first episode of the HIV Unmuted podcast series. Let's listen to what he had to say to set the stage for our discussion today.
Well, the big and last holy grail that we have to achieve is to develop a safe and effective vaccine. We have done spectacularly well over the years with antiretroviral drugs that we all know now have been transforming in their ability to suppress virus to below detectable level, thus not only saving the life of persons with HIV and allowing them to live essentially, for the most part, a normal life and approaching a normal lifespan. But also by keeping the level of virus to below detectable, it essentially makes transmissibility impossible for a person with an undetectable viral load. And then we have pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is very, very important. We now have long-acting antivirals that make it easier to do a therapeutic regimen for someone. But the one last thing that we absolutely need to do, that would be the nail in the coffin of this pandemic, would be a safe and effective vaccine. And that's a lot of efforts being put into that. And as difficult as it is, I believe it's achievable.
So now I want to turn it over to you, Linda-Gail and Maureen, to discuss your views on the continued need for an HIV vaccine.
Maureen, Dr. Fauci has said it the way it is. It is the holy grail, an HIV vaccine. Ever since I can remember, in my medical career since 1986, we've been holding out for an HIV vaccine. And I think that is because we know that the one way to control an infectious disease, especially one that has occurred around the world, occurred across generations, infects silently and, gets transmitted silently, that the only way we can really control the epidemic absolutely is to find a safe and effective preventive vaccine. And so, I couldn't agree more that this is something we really are holding out for.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And I think for me, I just wanted to start by acknowledging the efforts of many scientists, including you, Linda-Gail, and the communities, of course, that have contributed towards the search for an effective HIV vaccine. I think much as we still don't have an effective HIV vaccine available for use on the market today, I think their remarkable effort should always be greatly appreciated. And now coming back to the question as to why finding an effective HIV vaccine has been elusive, I think Tony also alluded to that point, that we know from a scientific point of view, finding an effective HIV vaccine has rather been challenging because of the way HIV rapidly mutates, which has made it rather difficult to find, one. On the other hand, I just wanted also to mention that COVID-19 vaccine development has in a way helped shed more light on what we have been missing, right, in the search for an HIV vaccine. Starting with the level of coordination, the pooling of funding and resources, and the global agency, which we have seen in the COVID-19 space, but we haven't seen it in the search for an effective vaccine. So I think it's also important to mention that COVID vaccine development and rollout also has in a way exposed a lot of hidden misconceptions that communities have had around vaccine. And the reason why I'm calling it hidden is because I believe these misconceptions are not new. They've been there. And it's just that they haven't surfaced the way they have surfaced with COVID-19 vaccine. And I remember in 2011, when I used to be a committee advisory board member for UNC, and I participated in one of the committee engagements where we had the chance to speak to the mothers about the vaccine. I was a bit shocked to learn about the depth of misconceptions that committee held around vaccine. And I think those long-held misconceptions, which I have no doubt, is something that we should also expect, of course, in the search for an HIV vaccine. But the good thing is I know there's still hope for an HIV vaccine. I myself believe that finding an effective vaccine is within reach, especially if we replicate the increased funding, the global coordination, the global and local political commitment that we have seen in the COVID-19 vaccine space.
That's absolutely right, Maureen. I think you cannot underestimate the power of political will, resources, and just energy that has gone into finding a COVID-19 vaccine. And one really hopes that kind of energy can be brought to the HIV vaccine field. Of course, the biology remains. The science is somewhat stacked against us in HIV. There's no doubt it's a more tricky virus to find a vaccine for. Having said that, I'm hopeful that some of the technology that has been brought to bear in COVID could also be translated into HIV. And I think we're going to hear more about that in the series down the line. But, for example, the mRNA vaccines, I think, are really exciting and new, and it'll be great to see if they can be applied to HIV. AIDS is political, right? Since the beginning, it has been political. How we support individuals who have really grappled with HIV, the people who succumb to HIV, the people who live with HIV, we have stigmatized them, we've discriminated against them. And so there is no doubt that it's been a political problem. And it's for this reason that, often we haven't seen the kind of responses, particularly in prevention, that we would have wanted to see. Look at prevention for harm reduction, prevention for people who sell sex. This has not been embraced by the world at large. And in some countries, it's criminalized and, marginalized in the most extreme way. And I think that contributes to setting investigations and research and development in the field back. I think that is just a fact.
Yeah, thanks. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Indeed, thanks to R&D, we now have a bulging HIV prevention toolbox with, of course, quite a number of HIV prevention tools like PrEP that are available on the market. And we know we have a few in the regulatory approval processes, as well as some in clinical trial phase. Of course, the HIV prevention tools that we have to date are great, and they've really helped save a lot of lives, right? But on the other hand, I think just agree with you, Linda, that they are not enough, right, to get us to the finish line of the race against HIV. We know that in 2019 alone, 1.7 million people acquired HIV, and the UN global targets for reducing new HIV infections were widely missed, indicating the need for more action and agency for us to contain the HIV epidemic. The current HIV prevention tools remain inaccessible to some, if not the majority of those who need them. And this could be either due to their cost, right? Either due to the adherence issues. It could be availability. Some of them, they're still not available, even though they have been approved. They're on the market, but they're still not available in other countries or in other communities. but also due to other structural barriers to access that different populations, especially, key populations face, for instance, AGYW face when accessing services, HIV prevention services in particular. So I believe also that, ending HIV as a global health threat will require, of course, rapid scale-up of at-risk near universal coverage of the high-impact HIV prevention interventions. And in order for us to achieve that near universal coverage, we will definitely require additional tools that meet the needs of the different people. And I think, like you have said, Linda, an HIV vaccine fits very well in that at least it offers long-term protection. It also helps address some of the adherence issues that I talked about. And in a way, it helps limit regular engagement with the healthcare system, which is one of the challenges or issues that, communities have raised with regards to accessing different HIV prevention tools. So definitely an effective HIV vaccine will increase the number of HIV prevention tools that are available, especially in the context of a choice-based prevention programming, which is what advocates and communities have been pushing for. So yes, we still need an HIV vaccines to add to what we already have for us to get to the finish line of the race against HIV.
You mentioned that a vaccine would limit the need for regular engagement with the healthcare system. Long-acting PrEP would do that too, right? So where does a vaccine fit in that context?
So many people would say, well, since we now have the promise of long-acting pre-exposure prophylaxis, for instance, we've had the results of the long-acting cabotegravir, both in men who have sex with men, transgender women, and also now in women who have sex with men. These are very exciting data and certainly hold great promise. And just to remind people, this means you only need to take a shot of cabotegravir 6 times a year. In addition, we will be testing other long-acting injectables such as lenacapavir in the near future, and that may actually only require an injection 2 or 3 times a year. And then we also hear the promise of implants. So you could argue, really, what would a vaccine add to the mix here? But there's no doubt that antiretrovirals do cause side effects. There are individuals who prefer not to take pharmaceutical agents such as antiviral agents, and there are those individuals who can't because of toxicity or other issues. We also have to remember that the antiviral agents do have the limitation of resistance. So this virus, besides being a difficult culprit to find a vaccine against, also mutates in the presence of antiviral agents with some ease. And so that continues to be a threat to any antiretroviral-based option, is that we have to keep an eye on resistance and be able to, stay one step ahead of that. So these are the reasons that a intervention such as a vaccine becomes really important. And we've said repeatedly, and I'm sure Maureen will have more to say about this, choice becomes very important when we want large numbers of people to adopt something and stick with it. So when we meet people's preferred option, they are far more likely to use a modality. And this is again where a vaccine offers another very important opportunity.
Of course, one would argue to say, but yeah, either way, maybe the long-acting, cabotegravir or the other tools that are in the pipeline would also help address the issue of adherence, which, again, by the end of the day, yes, they are addressing the issues of adherence, but I think the vaccine also, in a special way, also helps address the issue of adherence in such a way that it offers that long protection against diseases, and that people don't even have to think about, protecting themselves. Once they get inoculated, they don't even have to think about protecting themselves from getting infected with HIV. So yeah, choice I think is paramount, but also the adherence issues is something that the HIV vaccine could help address. But I think the most beautiful thing, which is a point that Linda talked about, is scientific in terms of an HIV vaccine versus ARV-based long-acting injectables, and the need for us to monitor the side effects. Like Linda said, I think that is really key. I think as we are all considering whether an HIV vaccine will still be viable in the presence of all these other long-acting injectables or long-acting tools that are becoming available.
Thanks to you both for your reflections on why we still need an HIV vaccine. In your work, have you observed continued interest in the community for an HIV vaccine?
Communities still believe, definitely learning from how we have dealt with previous pandemics, as highlighted by Linda earlier on. Communities still hope and believe that in an effective HIV vaccine will be the answer, right? If you want to completely wipe out or control the HIV pandemic. And they hope that soon, one day, if not soon, we should be able to find an effective HIV vaccine, yeah.
And I would absolutely second that, in our clinical trial spaces, we have never not had a demand for participation in HIV vaccine trials or any vaccine trials for that matter, including tuberculosis and other things. I think there's a deep belief in vaccination still here in Africa. I think people recognize the importance of childhood vaccination and the value that brings. And with that, people embrace the promise. And as Maureen says, I think continue to really hold out a great deal of hope for vaccines and their benefit. And of course, COVID has again shown us just what we can do when we have an effective vaccine. So the rate at which certainly some countries and regions have been able to deploy the vaccine is breathtaking. So as you say, levels of penetration that we have just not seen with other kinds of prevention modalities. And so that is the beauty of vaccines. And of course, the outcome of that is that you can eradicate a disease. I mean, we've got rid of smallpox and we are very close, if not completely there, to eliminate polio. Two devastating illnesses that have been controlled with the deployment of effective vaccines. So that's what the promise holds. And of course, all of our lives changed in 2009 when that RV144 vaccine trial came to read out. And we knew for the first time that an HIV vaccine was actually feasible and could be done. And, disappointing that we weren't able to emulate that and take that to scale immediately. But I think, that really should fuel the field to keep looking and to look harder, to bring more modalities, more resources to the bear to see if we can actually get to the finish line, as you say. And of course, we shouldn't look away from the fact that we have some vaccine trials in the field even today. Whilst we have perhaps had some disappointment on the one hand with RV144, I think very exciting that we are waiting to see what we might learn from Imbokodo, the AD26 regimen, and Mosaico. And of course, PrEP-Vac is in the field at the moment. And then very exciting was the recent data with the AMP trials. Now, that isn't active immunization, that's passive immunization. But the very exciting information that comes out of that is that we can prevent HIV through neutralizing antibodies, very broadly acting antibodies. And that, again, is very important scientific information on how we design and engineer the vaccines of the future. So I think there are lots of positive signposts, and more than ever, I think we can take a lot of excitement into the field to say the quest for an HIV vaccine should not be over, and we have to press forward to the ultimate goal. So one thing that I think has been disappointing in the HIV vaccine discovery space is just that it's taken a long time. We're into our 4th decade of HIV. And by contrast, look at this. We have all these vaccines 14 months into the COVID pandemic. This is just extraordinary. So there is no doubt that our hope is that somehow we'll find that kind of political will, resources, scientific drive, community embracing so that we can speed up the R&D towards an HIV vaccine. I've mentioned that we have at least 3 efficacy trials in the field at the moment, but that's kind of too few. And by comparison, again, with what we've seen in the COVID space. So my hope would be that we would reduce the time from the early phase. And I think there are some very exciting early phase trials on the go at the moment, some that are kind of reverse engineering from the broadly neutralizing antibody space. And that has been a breakthrough in the last few years of discovery, that we would speed up the time from those early phase trials getting into phase 3s and moving the field forward. And I think that's what we really are hoping our advocacy and our talking about this would bring to the field. Just a real recognition that we can be doing these things in parallel, we can be moving this forward, and time is of the essence in addition. So I would hope that we will take a leaf out of the COVID book in this regard and start to do things in parallel, moving the R&D field forward as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think definitely I agree with you, Linda. There's a lot that we can learn from the COVID vaccine development. And I think moving forward, definitely with HIV vaccine research, I think we would need to follow the same lessons and move definitely much faster between phases of research. I think what we saw in the race for a COVID vaccine was that researchers, right, were encouraged to think creatively, as well as being able to pursue multiple reads and break down the barriers to innovation. So definitely, I think moving forward, these are some of the lessons that we need to replicate as we move forward with the development of an effective HIV vaccine. I think as we are moving forward with a number of clinical trials currently going on, but also in anticipation of future HIV vaccine trials, I think I just wanted to talk about the need for community engagement, which has also been an issue that has been highlighted, I think I would say, in the COVID vaccine development space. I think as the search for an effective HIV vaccine continues, community engagement is going to be paramount. Of course, we know that the COVID-19 vaccines, has set the vaccine efficacy bar really high. And I know what one might wonder or ask themselves, what would be the acceptable efficacy for an HIV vaccine, right? What would be acceptable, for instance, to communities in terms of an HIV vaccine efficacy? And I guess this is where it will be important for us to make sure that there is a robust community engagement and community preparation, especially in the readiness of the HIV vaccine trial results, so that we are able to manage, expectations. I think community engagement definitely will also be key in addressing the existing misconceptions, especially during the vaccine rollout. I think what is important is that there will be need for transparency, right, throughout the vaccine process, which is going to be key, to help debunk, the misinformation, as well as just to help build that public trust, right? I think which is going to be very, very key.
So, Maureen, I think you've summed it up really beautifully. We need people, we need science, and we need progress.
That does sum it up nicely. To wrap up our discussion, I just want to ask, what would you say to those who might suggest an HIV vaccine is no longer a priority, given we have other effective HIV prevention strategies?
Definitely, an effective HIV vaccine is highly needed. Yes, we acknowledge that we have quite a number of effective HIV prevention tools that are available on the market right now. Some, of course, are still going through under regulatory approval, and some that are being studied under clinical trials. But definitely what we have right now is not enough, right, to get us to the finish line of this race against HIV.
With almost 2 million infections in the last year or two of the HIV pandemic, and now in its fourth decade, there is no doubt in my mind that the quest to find an HIV vaccine remains an absolutely urgent one. We are not going to see the end of this pandemic if we do not find an HIV preventive vaccine. We can do it. We have shown in the last few months what we can do when the world puts its energies together, the world focuses on a single goal, and gets the job done. And, it's been eye-opening what has been achieved with COVID-19 and vaccination. And we can apply this to HIV vaccines, and we can continue to look for a vaccine that can draw a halt to the epidemic. This is possible.
Well, thank you again, Linda-Gail and Maureen, for participating in this discussion. And thanks to our listeners for joining us. As a reminder, click on the links in the show notes to check for additional podcasts in this series or to listen to the HIV Unmuted podcast series produced by IAS. And please be sure to check back regularly for more episodes on important infectious disease topics. Thanks.